And now, here is the news from Scotland.
When they read the news in Glasgow, it's in English, not Scots. If the Scots did use their own tongue, the language of Robert Burns, it would sound something like this.
Guid. In the next 2 or 3 minutes, the Space Shuttle Challenger will bringe up fra Cape Canaveral. The 5 astronauts will be in space for 8 days. It's the 10th shuttle flight. The Preven of the Yeoman Bringe packs, officially called Minute Manoeuvring Units, carries space voyaging that muckle nearer the fantastic world of Buck Rogers. Snell winds hae wrought havoc in all the westland airts of Scotland the day. Glasgow folk especially had a good wheen broken lums to thole, and while the west chittered in the cold sook of the wind, the northeast was smothered with cranrooch and snow. And that's the news in Scotland the nicht. Frae me, good night.
The Scottish tongue is one of the oldest in Britain. The Anglo-Saxon tribes who invaded England also settled in lowland Scotland as early as the 7th century. After the Norman conquest, many English refugees fled north and established English-speaking boroughs like Edinburgh throughout the lowlands. This was the beginning of Scots, a northern variety of English that might have become a separate language. Much of the distinctive vocabulary of the Scottish lowlands is now known throughout the English-speaking world. Words like brae for bank, burn for stream, glen for valley, loch for lake, wee for small, and bonny for pretty. There's an old saying that Scotland was born fighting. For generations, border wars between English and Scots kept the two kingdoms and their languages apart. Had Scotland remained a fully independent country, its language might have been as different from English as Swedish is from Danish. In its golden age during the 15th century, Scottish was the speech of kings and aristocrats, and the inspiration of poets like Barber and Dunbar. You can still hear the Scottish tongue in pockets throughout the lowlands, and particularly in the northeast, in the country round the oil and fishing port of Aberdeen. One of the men who works down on the quayside is the fish filleter, Stanley Robertson.
Well, I'm for the car filleter. If you were going to take fish out to the sea and just cook them the way they were, it wouldn't be awfully pleasant because you'd have got sinine and nothing upon them. But if I get one of that fish, I take off a fin and off the scales and I cut all the flesh off of it. Because no housewife going to like a fish the way it is. So that's for the idea, I'm a filleter.
Stanley Robertson's speech is full of typical Scottish vocabulary and pronunciation. Ken for no, bide for stay, and gang for go. He says aboot, hoose, and awa, for about, house, and away.
I really like to get away for the fish who snoot into the country, to get away beside the old castles, because from I was a bear and by bed doing about all these old castles, and you were able to transport your mind away to the things that happened long ago.
He's one of the last traditional storytellers, and he knows more Scottish folk tales and ballads than any man alive.
The stories that I've been told are all sort of told in a country language. This is why I tell them, handed down with the same tongue to the oral tradition. This is a story called Jack in the Devil's Castle. About Hiney back, many, many years ago, there lived an old woman, and she bed in a wee cottar hussy. And she had 3 laddies. Our youngest laddie was called Jack. Now, Jackie's Jew, he was a hard-working chiel. You ken as he would get up early in the morning and work, do the ploughing, do all the work through the farm, and wouldn't go to his bed till late at night. But these 2 brothers was the most useless and laziest bechels you ever did see. They wouldn't do a hand's turn about the farm, and they wouldn't help their mother.
Another source of inspiration for the oral tradition of the Scots can be found in the Bachelors' Club, Tarbolton. Every year, the birthday of Robert Burns is celebrated here by the literary and debating society founded by the poet. It's in the nostalgic recollection of Burns that Lowland Scots, the language of his finest lyrics, still gladdens Scottish hearts around the world. Tonight, Willie Ross will toast the immortal memory.
Mr. Chairman and friends, I don't think there's any more daunting task can be asked of any Scotsman, and certainly not of an Ayrshirman, than that of proposing the immortal memory of Robert Burns.
Before his death at the age of 37, it was Burns' achievement as a poet to shun the fashion for English and draw on a Scottish tradition that had become despised. He restored his nation's voice and gave Scots a new pride.
He wrote nearly 350 songs. Songs that a quarter of them are masterpieces. Ye banks and braes, Auld Lang Syne. My love is like a red, red rose that's newly sprung in June. My love is like the melody so sweetly played in tune. As fair art thou, my bonny lass, so deep in love am I, and I will love thee still, my dear, till all the seas gang dry. And they say we're tongue-tied as Scots when it comes to love. Don't you believe it? We've got Burns to draw upon, and we can glory in the fact that he saved part of the language of Scotland, and he gave us this glorious treasury. It's almost equal with the name of Scotland. Gentlemen, I ask you to be upstanding and drink with me the immortal memory of Robert Burns. Robert Burns.
Auld Lang Syne, meaning old long since or long ago, is the Burns poem known throughout the world, the unofficial Scottish national anthem. In the heyday of the Scots, Holyrood House was the seat of the Scottish sovereign. James VI was the last king to rule here. He wrote and spoke broad Scots, but when Queen Elizabeth I of England died, he inherited her throne and moved to London. James VI of Scotland left his palace of Holyrood House here in Edinburgh and became James I of Great Britain, the first monarch to unite the 2 crowns. At a stroke, the center of gravity shifted to the English-speaking south, and Scotland was gradually merged into the English mainstream. It's a turning point in our story. The separate development of the Scottish tongue had already been weakened by the southern influence. Now it was irrevocably arrested by the departure of the Scottish aristocracy.
Keep up, Peter. Keep right up.
Thirlestone is one of the most strategic castles on the high road to Edinburgh. Fought over for centuries, it's the home of Captain the Honourable Gerald Maitland Carew and his family.
Try and keep up.
They've lived in this valley for generations. Their ancestors fought for Scotland at battles like Bannockburn and Flodden Field. They're as Scottish as they could be. The Maitland history is the story of Scotland in miniature. Many of these portraits celebrate Maitlands who followed James to London.
Probably the most prominent was John Maitland, generally known as Chancellor John, who was Lord Chancellor to James I of England, James VI of Scotland. And so he would have gone south with James VI when he went to London, and was a very prominent man in history, and was created Lord Thelston by James I.
An early Maitland spoke Scots so broad it was said his tongue was too big for his mouth. But in time, the Maitlands affected London ways and London accents. Samuel Johnson said of the Scots that the great, the learned, the ambitious, and the vain all cultivate the English phrase.
Watch the ball. Oh, you're out.
To get on at court, the Scots needed a command of London English. Today, Maitland Carew speaks upper-class English. For all his Scots ancestry, he has no trace of a Scottish accent.
Right. Watch the ball.
After all, my ancestors have been educated in the south, and through that I would say that is why we speak Queen's English.
Are you ready? Come on, boys, it's tea time.
I love all to do with Scotland. I think it's a very rich language, and I love listening to it.
I'll have to go back to the other one.
I'm very bad at putting on accents, therefore I can't speak it.
Well done. You win.
For more than 300 years, ambitious Scots have taken lessons to lose what were once called marks of rusticity.
Oh, dear. Hi, Bertie. It's not your tea time.
Even today, the two boys will go to an English public school.
There we are.
Ever since King James moved to London, it's been English, not Scots, that had snob value among the leaders of society.
I might have a little bit of cake, please.
To strengthen the union of crowns, King James ordered that every church in Scotland should conduct its Sunday services using his newly translated Bible, the Authorized Version. Fraser Aitken, the minister in Girvan, is a true Scot. But for 350 years, he and his fellow churchmen have used the King James Bible, written in the standard Southern English of its day.
It's fine. Okay, good. Lead off.
It is thanks to King James that Fraser Aitken will preach not in broad Scots, but in standard English with a Scottish accent.
Good morning. How amiable are thy tabernacles, O Lord of hosts! My soul longeth, yea, even fainteth for the courts of the Lord. My heart and my flesh crieth out for the living God.
Since King James's day, there's been a decline in Scots. Today, it's clearly a variety of English, not a separate language. But the Scottish accent survives, and so does national pride in its distinctive music. When the New Testament in Scots was published recently, only the devil spoke London English. Occasionally, Fraser Aitken reads the lesson in the old tongue.
Our reading this morning is taken from the New Testament in Scots. I the forenocht of that same day, the first day of the week, the disciples were sitting ahent lockfast doors for dread of the Jews, when Jesus came and stood in their midst. Ane of the 12, Thomas, that was called the twin, wasn't with them when Jesus came. And when they told him that they had seen the Lord, he said to them, I say ne'er believe sic a thing. A sinnicht after hin, his disciples was in by again, and Thomas was with them. When Jesus came and stayed in their midst, for all the doors was locked fast, and said, A blessing on you. Sin he said to Thomas, Rax here your finger and look at my hands. Rax out your hand and stop it into my side. And binna misdouten nae meer, but believing. Thanks be to God for the gospel. Amen.
Of course, lowland Scottish English, the language of Robert Burns, spread far beyond Scotland. In 1608, King James encouraged the lowlanders to establish Scottish plantations in the north of Ireland.
For centuries, there has been a lot of comings and goings between Northern Ireland and Scotland. One of the local landmarks is a volcanic plug, and its nickname that's been given both by Irish and Scots folk is Paddy's Milestone. And from this part of Ayrshire, on a clear day, weather permitting, you can see the coast of Northern Ireland.
This is the Giant's Causeway. Here, according to legend, a Scots giant crossed the water and was challenged by an Irish giant. In the story, the Irish giant prevailed, but in 1608, the Scots-Irish, as they now became, showed no signs of going home and were soon settled in with a vengeance. King James gave huge land grants from the confiscated estates of the Irish lords, and some of the settlers achieved great prosperity. The backbone of the new Ulster colony was Scottish, small farmers living and working as they'd done for centuries in the lowlands. But it was not a peaceful settlement for long. Towns like Londonderry became walled fortresses at war with the Gaelic-speaking Irish, and the siege of Derry gave the language a new phrase, no surrender. And up on the walls of Derry, the security forces are still fighting the legacy of these historic battles. In the present troubles, many of the Ulster Protestants have Scottish forebears. As we shall see in another program, the English of their Irish Catholic enemies is influenced by the Gaelic past. Today in Northern Ireland, the IRA still fight a war that is hundreds of years old, but the language battle has been lost. Though the IRA talk of one Ireland united in Gaelic, the language of resistance is English. So the fighting tradition of the Scots lived on. And even today, in orange marches throughout the province, the Protestant descendants of those first settlers still celebrate their ancestors' victories over the Irish Catholics. It was Protestant victories like these that made Lowland Scots the language of much of Northern Ireland. Even here on Slemish Mountain, where St. Patrick himself once grazed his sheep. The areas of Scottish settlement form a crescent along the northeast coast of Ireland. In County Antrim, near the market town of Ballymena, their speech has as good a claim to be Scottish as the Scots of the lowlands. It's the older people in the country who best preserve the Scottishness of Ulster English.
Take 6 to 4.
Frank and Sammy White have trained horses all their lives.
What do you intend betting on?
I'm for betting Glancer.
What do you, Glancer?
It's money I want. Glancer.
But they know more about horses than betting.
But I would think all the money he has won wouldn't take him far.
Oh, take him oh, no, well, yes.
I was thinking it wouldn't be just going
Well,
you wouldn't be going on a holiday anyway.
No, but I was laughing more than £20 at the time. And I laughed at it 2 or 3 times. So it counts up, through time.
I never do gamble because I think I know a certain amount about horses. I never seem to be in the right one. It's either second or third, or it hits a fence, it falls, and that's it. My fiver's gone.
There's one there, 27, brave and easy. That one's likely to go brave and well.
That's a good jump there, well.
Is that Ballylope there? Ballylope there.
Well, that doesn't mean anything, they're only starting.
That's that line third there now, Ballylope, Gallop.
Well, it's not galloping about weight.
Well, it's galloped all year and hasn't won anything.
Well, look, you nearly think she's dropping back too far.
No, she'll put up a better racing her out.
And it's a sensible pace. There's good enough jumping now. So much on a wee back like that.
Where's the favourite? Nearly lost.
I know.
Almost the only part of the Scottish accent you won't hear in Frank and Sammy's broad speech is the famous rolled R of the Lowland Scots.
Anything out of Ireland has trouble understanding me.
We're not talking city talk. If we went out tomorrow to the same as ourselves and the ordinary farmers and started some big highfalutin talk, they would think that there was something wrong. And we just talk normally.
In the nearby Braid Valley, Frank and Sammy's nephew, Alec Miller, is taking 2 heifers to Ballymena Market.
The Millers came to the Braid Valley and the plantation of Ulster in the early 17th century. And they have been here since. They came from Scotland and they have been here for generations. And I'm living on the farm which I inherited from my father and his father and grandfather and great-grandfather before him. And life goes on in a quiet sort of a way, and people don't travel too far.
Scots-Irish farmers have been coming to the market at Ballymena since the first settlement. Many of them have traditional Scottish-sounding names like McCulloch, McBurney, Cruikshank, Jameson, Logan and Reed. But not only do the farmers around here preserve Scottish words, they preserve Scottish ways, too. They're famously thrifty. It's said they have short arms and deep pockets.
100 pint, 100 big, and 100 pint all that in front. Okay, please, 100. Very good.
The Ballymena Scotchman is reputed to be even more Scotch than the Scotch themselves.
Can the black heifer cow. Nice one there, you'll start again. 90, 80, 70.
Quite a few words used locally in this area, which there'd be no point in me using to you because I know you wouldn't understand them. Because they're of Scottish origin and they would probably be more easily understood in Scotland and in parts of England.
The farmers here say new for now, coo for cow, abin for above, and fernenst for opposite. The Scottish influence is so obvious that in the past, when Gaelic-speaking Irishmen came to town to learn English, they said they'd come to lift the Scotch. One man who's made a lifelong study of Ulster English is Professor John Braidwood, himself a Scotsman.
Oh, my own accent is southwest Scottish, and that is the accent of Burns, and that is the voice that was brought across by the Scots to Ulster.
Robert Burns is as much a national poet among the Scots-Irish as he is among the Scots, and many of the words that Professor Braidwood is collecting for his dictionary of Ulster English have their roots in Scotland, too.
You'd hear words like hain. Hain is to use a thing sparingly, to save it up because you haven't got enough to hain. The Scots hadn't very much, they had to hain. Gunk, but disappointment. You get a queer gunk, as they say, a queer disappointment, a right disappointment. They would use word like blate. Blate means backward and coming forward. Shy, you see, to be very blate, to be guy blate. They use Gaelic Scot very often as an adverb, just qualifying thing. Very blate, guy blate. They would use words like focht and better focht to focht continuously. Scunner. I can't even express it, and it's such a common word here. The scunner, to disgust. Oh, you take a scunner, you take a scunner at a thing, you're totally disgusted with it. Now, a good strong ch is the mark of the Ulster Scot. And they've got all the Scottish Burnsish pronunciations. They would say stain and hame for stone and home. If somebody shouts names at you in school, you shout back, sticks and stains will break my banes, but names will never hurt me.
About 100 years after the first Ulster settlements, the Scots-Irish were on the move again. Typically undaunted, they set off with a characteristic swagger to another frontier, the colonies of North America. In the 1700s, Philadelphia was the largest city in the American colonies. Its river, the Delaware, was the main point of entry for the majority of the Scots-Irish. In the 1720s, some 50,000 of them came here, bringing their distinctive lowland Scottish speech. They added an important new element to the sound of American English. And as you've heard, there was no mistaking the accents of these pioneers. In 1760, Benjamin Franklin, who was right about most things, estimated that Pennsylvania was 1/3 English, 1/3 German, and 1/3 Scots-Irish. The Scots-Irish went all over the New World, from Montreal to Charleston. They were to play an important part in spreading English throughout America. But it was here in Philadelphia that the subtle pressures of immigration began slowly to transform the Scots-Irish accent. John Fott of the University of Pennsylvania.
When the Scotch-Irish arrived in Philadelphia, they came into a city that was already multilingual. There were English settlers, and there were large numbers of Germans. German was an amazingly important language in the colonial period, and especially in the Pennsylvania colony.
Today, the most visible descendants of those German settlers are the Amish farmers of Pennsylvania.
As the Scotch-Irish settlers came into this situation, their speech would necessarily be affected by contact with these other accents. And this contact must have been very important in the changes that took place in the accent during this period.
The Germans traded customs and language with their Scots-Irish neighbors, giving us words like hex, meaning a spell. But the best land had gone. The Scots-Irish pushed on south towards the Blue Hills. Here they adapted naturally to the pioneering life of the frontier. With their long rifles and coonskin hats, Scots-Irishmen, like the legendary Davy Crockett, acquired a ferocious reputation as Indian fighters. Their speech excited comment, too. Even contemporary Americans called it broad. Good boasters and compulsive storytellers, the Scots-Irish had a keen ear for a striking phrase, and their proverbs and ballads survive to this day. Davy Crockett described himself as half horse, half alligator, a little touched with snapping turtle. The long rifleman gave new life to expressions like hang fire, going off at half cock, keeping your powder dry, and a flash in the pan. The Scots-Irish flavor of their speech survives today in dozens of colorful phrases like mad as a meat axe and dead as a hammer. The frontier scouts and Indian fighters had blazed the trail. The land-hungry Scots-Irish squatters soon followed. Heading southwest, together with English and German settlers, they followed the trails and rivers into the Appalachian Mountains and beyond, funneled westwards through the famous pass known as the Cumberland Gap.
Lay down, boys, take a little nap, 14 miles to the Cumberland Gap, Cumberland Gap, Cumberland Gap, 14 miles to the Cumberland Gap.
Today, that combination of Scots-Irish and English and German settlers has created the unique way of life of Appalachia.
Cumberland Gap, Cumberland Gap, 14 miles to the Cumberland Gap, Cumberland Gap, Cumberland Gap, 14 miles to the Cumberland Gap.
In Appalachia, they say that where the English built a house and the Germans a barn, the Scots-Irish built a whiskey still. Willard Watson is an old moonshiner, and he calls his brew Mountain Lightning.
A pint is enough, and a pint is just about too much. If you drink a pint of moonshine whiskey and you won't know where the sun went down or where it come up. She'll get you where you couldn't hit the wall with a handful of beans.
Professor Kratos Williams is known as the father of Appalachian studies. He grew up in the mountains here and likes to keep in touch with what he calls his hillbilly roots.
Good morning, Willard.
Yes, sir. Kratos, I'm wonderful to see you.
I'm glad to see you.
According to Kratos Williams, although the English and Germans played a part in shaping the talk of the mountains, the dominant influence was Scots-Irish.
What are you doing here?
I'm making some moonshine whiskey on Wildcat Road.
About 3 of our 5 to come into the mountains were the Scotch-Irish people. The things that differentiate this noble kind of a dialect in a way, though it's often laughed at, are these characteristics, I think. No one says hair the way we do. We say her. Similarly, we say bar, far, mar, thar. We continue to use the Middle English in front of ing words. So we go a-hunting and a-fishing and so forth. We continue to omit the final G. I suspect, strictly speaking, we don't really omit it. We never did get around to putting it on. We also have our way of saying O-U. That differentiates us from other people. For us, that is a triphthong. We say about the house. If there's an R following that, we really have something interesting. We say flare basket. Let's go up on the mountain and gather flares.
Pronunciations like these are found all over the Appalachian Mountains. This traditional style of speech, words and phrases like plumb right and afeard, is sometimes mistakenly thought to be Elizabethan.
If the boiler don't bust because it's eat up with rust.
2 typical mountain people are Ray Hicks and his wife, Rosie.
Well, Ray and I has been growed up in the mountains. Well, Ray was raised right here, and I was raised not too far from over across the hill there.
Outsiders are impressed by hearing us say hit for it. Hit and it can both appear in the same sentence. If the word is stressed, it's hit. If it's not stressed, it's it. For example, one would never say, I've never heard of hit. It's, I've never heard of it. Hit's something new to me.
You can hear Rosie Hicks say hit for it when she describes the best route to their house.
You fly in an airplane as far as you can come. Then you get in a car or truck and ride as far as you can go and hit. Then you get down and run as far as you can. Then you crawl on your hands and knees as far as you can come. Go that way. Then you straighten up, and then you find a house. It's an old-timey one. It looks haunted, but it's really not.
Ray Hicks is famous round here. People come from miles around to hear him tell folk tales in one of the last true surviving Appalachian accents.
Howdy,
howdy, howdy. Hello. Yeah.
The next generation will probably never forget these outings.
Howdy, Ray. Howdy. How are you today? Just amazing. How are you? Just come on in.
Howdy, Ray.
Just come on in.
Tell us a ghost story, Ray. Yeah, tell us a ghost story. Yeah.
Okay.
Many Appalachian stories have come from Scotland, and Ray Hicks tells Jack tales like Stanley Robertson in Aberdeen. The most famous is Jack and the Beanstalk. But in this one, Jack meets a beggar who gives him a magic sack.
He says, I'm going to give you something. He said, here's a sack that if anything gets to bothering you, just say whickety-whack into this sack. And said he'll stuff right down in there. And directly he is a-watching, and down come 6 black devils swinging down through the scuttle hole, he called, and had a sword apiece. They was at him with them swords, and he was a-jumping around there, and that log cabin a-shaking, and so with the sack over in the corner, he jumped over and grabbed it, and he said, whickety-whack. He said, devils, come down in this sack.
The broadest Appalachian accents still linger up here, but a modified version has now spread far beyond these hills. As the Scots-Irish, footloose and restless as ever, moved on down in the early 1800s to lead the westward expansion of the American frontier. But as they traveled down the continent's rivers, their broad accents were slowly leveled out.
The Scotch-Irish moved on from the mountains and began moving down the valleys and rivers into the Trans-Appalachian West. So this accent gets an early start and spreads very quickly down the Ohio Valley and even down the Mississippi.
By the middle of the last century, the Appalachian accent had spread westwards across the continent. It had leaped the mighty Mississippi and the Ozark Mountains and crossed the plains to California. Since the Second World War, its influence and prestige have been growing stronger throughout the new Southwest.
The accent based on the Scotch-Irish people, the Midland accent, the Appalachian accent, in its generalized form as it spreads into the Western territories, has become one of the major dialects, one of the major accents of American English. Lately, the power, the economic power, and the number of speakers in the territory covered by this accent begun to increase greatly. This is the accent of the large portion of America known as the Sun Belt that has been gaining in power and prestige ever since World War II at a very rapid rate. Country music uses this accent, and many of the early performers, the most prominent performers, are from the dialect area, especially from Appalachia. But performers who want to sound like country musicians have to learn to imitate the accent, whether they come from there or not. So they have to learn to sound at least convincing enough to pass in their music for country speakers.
Well, I pulled out of Pittsburgh, heading down the eastern seaboard. I got my diesel wound up, and she's going like never before. There's a speed zone ahead, all right. I don't see a cop in sight. 6 days on the road, and we're gonna make it home tonight.
Yeah, how does it look behind you? Have you seen any bears back there anywhere in front of you?
You hear the accent all over the middle American area, but it's especially associated with truck drivers and with Citizens Band radio, too.
Wayne and Reba Maroney are a husband and wife trucking team who drive their rig down the freeways and highways of America.
Reba's got a more southern accent than I do. I was born in Louisville, Kentucky, and I got more or less that Mason-Dixon line north and south accent.
Truckers like Wayne love to use personalized CB call signs.
Well, different drivers use different handles. My handle will be Red Hot Pepper. My wife's handle is something special. We have other man and wife teams, South Wind, Little Breeze. Frosty and Mimi, that's a man and wife team. Double R, Barbie Doll. You just use alias names, you know, something short that you can remember.
Well, my rig's a little old, but that don't mean she's slow. There's a flame from a stack and the smoke are blowing black. It's cold. My hometowns are coming in sight. If you think I'm happy, you're right. 6 days on the road and I'm gonna make it home tonight.
The people of Memphis and Nashville haven't lost the Scots-Irish taste for talking talk.
Are you looking good all the way behind you?
The phrase, put the pedal to the metal, is a phrase that was used when CBs first came along as lingo for hammer down, put the pedal to the metal and come on. A concrete cowboy is someone that just gets out there and he just hammers down. He's just a gear jammer. He's kind of a rawhider. A rawhider is someone that gouges on a truck, treats it rough. He doesn't care about how he gets the gears crossed up, or he's just rough on equipment, and they don't stay around long.
In the jargon of CB radio, truckers speeding in their rigs or rides are always on the lookout for police, whom they call bears and county mounties.
Or county mountie. A county mountie is more or less a county cop. Your state bear would be Smokey the Bear or Tijuana, Texas. A two-wheel motorcycle bear, we call him Evel Knievel.
When we say a bear does a flip-flop, we mean that he's turned and went, like, if he was going westbound, he has turned around and started back eastbound. And he's shooting radar.
Today, this Midland accent is spoken by Americans who have no trace of Scots or Irish in their blood. But it was the hard-driving Scots-Irish who spread it far and wide. Rooted in the Appalachian Mountains, influenced by English and German, its deepest source lies, as we've seen, in Northern Ireland and in lowland Scotland. Like a long list of American presidents, Buchanan, Polk, Johnson, McKinley, Jackson, Grant, Harrison, about 10% of today's Americans, some 22 million people, can claim Scots-Irish ancestry. These men were lowlanders, as we've seen. But there is another Scotland of misty glens and skirling bagpipes, stirring tartans and Highland games. And the men of the Highlands also had what Samuel Johnson called this epidemic of wandering. The Highlanders were Gaelic-speaking Celts who were scorned by the English and lowland Scots. James VI called them utterly barbarous. Since the 18th century, their language, Scottish Gaelic, has been driven almost to extinction. It survives on remote islands like Barra in the Outer Hebrides. Many inhabitants will be influenced by the English of the airwaves, but Scots Gaelic, or Gaelic, is still the language of the post office and the harbour master.
Hello, good morning. Bistay Cleo Yahawk. Leo Yahawk. Shell, cheerio, ma. Somebody inquiring what time the ferry would be in.
In Barra, English, which is spoken throughout the world, is still an alien language, and before the ferry, virtually unknown.
English is like a foreign language to me. Before I went to school, it was very little English we spoke at home. It was after we went to school that we learned the English. Now, we've got a bit of English anyway, but it's mostly still Gaelic. Barra is a remote island. The ferry comes here 5 times a week from Oban, and it takes about 6 hours.
Wind and tide have kept Barra isolated, preserving its Gaelic traditions.
We get very bad weather, strong winds and rain. It's very open, as you can see.
Nothing could be further from the popular idea of a Scots accent than John MacDonald's lilting sing-song.
Captain Ferguson's been off and on here for quite some time.
Aye, midships.
He's captain on the Iona. The captain's got to decide whether to make the pier, just depending on the direction of wind. If it's on to the pier, it's hard for him to berth in alongside the pier. And if it's off, it's difficult sometimes to make the pier. The ferry is the main lifeline to the island.
Outsiders, people without the island, as the locals say, often think the Highlanders sound Irish. In fact, much of the Highland culture does come from Ireland. The kilt, the bagpipes, even the Irish surname prefix Mac. And on Barra, the old Highland game of shinty, very like the Irish sport hurling, is taught by the local priest, Father Colin McInnes.
When we hear a Gaelic speaker speaking in English, it would more resemble Irish, because the source is the same as regards the Irishman as it is for the Highlander, Islander, that is Gaelic. And it has the same rhythm and very often similarity of construction and so on.
Agus ma goit go buonig sin a gof bekammenach alapanach and ich beschau auf dachertje bleerne men na ma goit naflen ach ma goit getik da.
The English spoken here is a beautiful, sweet-sounding, rolling, soft type of English. It is a very comforting sound compared with the whiskered, fast-moving accents you get from the cities and towns.
The people of Barra speak Gaelic as freely as English, but their language faces extinction. It is in remote places like Barra that you can see the wounds inflicted by world English on a traditional local culture.
Our spirit in the Highlands and Islands is something supremely ours. We are, like all minority groups, a small freshwater loch being invaded by a huge ocean, and we are authentically Celtic, Gaelic, and have a distinct culture which has contributed a lot in the past and I'm sure will contribute a lot to our future.
Gaelic is their ancestral tongue, but even here, when the game gets exciting, they drop into English.
Dougie, go on, Dougie, go on!
Scots Gaelic has been a persecuted language ever since the revolt of 1745, led by Bonnie Prince Charlie, was defeated, when the ill-equipped Highlanders were mowed down by the British artillery at the Battle of Culloden, the subject of this early television documentary.
He stood on a knowe, the fetty sea, the snow fell on him lichtly, but in scarce 1 hour on Dromossie moor, he witnessed the murder o' his country. The hail o' Scotland's wearing black, a dressed up for the sodden. Prince Charlie chose the place himself, the graveyard o' Culloden.
In reality, the rebellion was small. But Highlanders have never forgotten that it was used as a pretext to impose the English way of life.
After Culloden, the laws that were enacted were ordained really to destroy the way of life, the language and the customs of the Highlanders and of the Islanders. The Highlander wasn't permitted to practice his language. He wasn't permitted to wear his native dress, which was something resembling what we call the kilt today. He wasn't permitted to carry arms, and it was something very significant to the Highlander at the time. He wasn't permitted to be educated through the medium of Gaelic. Consequently, it made it very difficult for the Gaelic culture to survive.
The Highland clearance has stripped the land of its Gaelic speakers. When Samuel Johnson made his famous tour of the Highlands a generation later, he noted sadly, "We came too late to see what we expected."
People were driven away out of the land altogether to Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Nova Scotia, and so many other parts of the world where we find islanders today. And every attempt was made to destroy the Highlander and the Islander as a specific cultural entity within Scotland.
Abbotsford was the home of the Scottish writer who devoted his life to fighting such a decline. Cherishing his country's lost independence, steeped in its poetry and myths. Novels like Rob Roy, Quentin Durwood, and The Heart of Midlothian have placed Sir Walter Scott's name next to Burns as a champion of Scotland and its literature. Robert Burns and a young Walter Scott are depicted here at their only meeting in a gathering of Scottish intellectuals. Both men gave inspiration to a revived Scottish nationalism, and the popularity of their work shows how literature can play on a sense of national pride. In fact, as we've seen, the reality of Highland life was often wretched, and the Scottish people traveled far and wide in search of a better future, taking not Gaelic with them, but English. One escape route for the Highlander was the British Army. Highland regiments have fought Britain's battles from Waterloo to the Falklands. But even in a Highland regiment, the language of command has always been English.
New sentries, about, tap! Sentries, pass!
John Northcote and Callum Keane are both Highland boys from Oban, brought up in Gaelic-speaking families. Enlisted in the Argyll and Sutherland Highlanders, the Argylls, they're living examples of the way in which British institutions have swallowed up the Celtic traditions of old Scotland. And even in Scotland, their city-educated lowland mates, a majority of the Argylls, mock their lilting Highland accents. They refer to them by the derogatory term tuchters.
When I came down from the Highlands, I spoke with a really broad Highland accent. And they all started saying, "Where are you from?" And I says, "Well, I'm from Oban." And they seemed to say, "He's a tuchter." They were taking the mickey out of me. They were slagging me all the time.
You no say much.
I says, "Well, I'm going to have to change my accent because I don't like getting slagged all the time."
You want a little eat?
So gradually, as the time went on, I picked up the lowland dialect. If I was talking in my old accent, I'd be talking more like a Highlander, like a tuchter, sort of like a real West Coast of Scotland person. My old native tongue, I'd say, like, for example, "Well, I'm going down the road, I'm going to go to the shops and I'm going to buy myself some bread." Whereas if I was talking in my Argyll dialect, I'd say, "I'm going down the shops and I'm going to get myself some bread." So it's sort of like a Glasgow accent.
To me, I feel a tuchter is a... Well, I may be wrong saying this, but to me I feel a tuchter is a real Scottish Highlander. Whereas Glasgow and that, they're just lowlanders. I wished I still had my old lingo.
The Highlanders have stood watch over British castles on British territory from Edinburgh to the Ganges. Driven from their lands by poverty and depression, they were forced to learn the language of their old enemies, and by a final irony, carried it for them to the four corners of the world, from Sydney to Saskatchewan. All that's left of the fighting clans are the great names, Campbell, Cameron, MacDonald, and MacLeod. The original Gaelic of so many Jacobite ballads longs for the return of the bonny prince. But of course he'll never come. His people are in exile. Their words have been translated into the English of an English-speaking world. And only their music lingers.
My bonny moor hen, my bonny moor hen, up in the grey hills down in the glen. It's when ye gang but the hoose, when ye gang ben, I drink a health to my bonny moor hen. My bonny moor hen is gayed o'er the main, and it will be summer ere she comes again. But when she comes back again, some folk'll ken. Oh, joy be with you, my bonny